Well, everybody, welcome back to the Storybox podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome a revolutionary human being. His name is James Nestor. Now, if you don't know who James is, he's an author and a journalist who has written for Scientific America, Outside, the New York Times, The Atlantic, National Public Radio, the San Francisco Chronicle, and so on. He's got his latest book out, which we're apparently not allowed to talk about, which is quite funny, called Breath. I'm just kidding. We're going to definitely talk about it today. The New Science of a Lost Art, which was released on May 26th this year. And it has become an instant New York Times and London Sunday Times bestseller. Breath explores how the human species has lost the ability to breathe properly. This sounds almost impossible, but it is true. Snoring, sleep apnea, asthma, allergies, and even autoimmune diseases are among the most prevalent diseases in the modern world. And all of them can be either exacerbated or sometimes caused by poor breathing. Nessa spent years in laboratories and ancient burial sites working with researchers at Stanford University of Pennsylvania and trying to figure out what went wrong with our breathing. And I guess today we're going to talk about all of that, unbox James's story today. But James, welcome so much to the Storybox podcast today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time. I really do appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time now. Before we dive into your backstory, how this all got started, I have one question I love asking all my guests at the start, which is, what does success look like for you?
Success to me is freedom to do what you want. And however you can get that freedom, that's the right way to do it. Some people view that as money, allowing them to have freedom. That's cool. Some people view it as not having a job. That's freedom, whatever. In my mind, that's what success is.
When was the moment for you that you realized that success was freedom to be able to do these things? Was it a catalyst moment somewhere in your life, or has it been like this gradual thing over time?
Well, I lived a very conventional lifestyle until somewhat recently. So I had a real job. I had, wore pretty nice shoes, wore some good iron shirts, and wrote ad copy, and was managing a staff of writers, and did this and I thought that this was what I was going to be taken to the grave, until finally I started writing magazine stories just to feed my brain a little bit of something. And I was absolutely fascinated by having the opportunity to go into these different worlds and understand things differently. And then even better, to go back out and then to process it and write about it. So I did that for years and years. I was moonlighting as a journalist until finally it came time to cut the cord. And I did that about 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago. Wow. Just gave up all security and just became a journalist. Don't do this, people. It's a very precarious way of making a living. So don't follow in my follies. But I'm just explaining to you my journey here.
I'm curious. I'll get back to that in a moment. But why journalism in the first place?
I'd always really enjoyed writing. I'd enjoyed the process. If you think about different arts, different mediums, if you want to be a filmmaker, you've got to spend so much money. You have to work with different people. You have to find financiers. And it's the same thing. Even an artist, you need a studio. You need, all this different equipment, depending on what kind of art. If you're into video art, that's a whole different thing. But writing is like one of the simplest things you can do. It's such a lo-fi art. It takes your brain, and you can even do it with a pad of paper and a pen if you want. A computer helps, but you can get a $50 computer and do it. And so there's an appeal to be able to work entirely on your own. That's also a bad thing, because you have to be a real self-starter in order to wake up every day and get the stuff done. But I love that responsibility. I love that comes down to freedom, right? The freedom to do what you want when you want to do it, and to get things done on your own terms is so important to me.
What have you noticed about, I guess, for writing and the creative aspect of writing as well? What have you noticed that creativity is for you?
Creativity is work. I know that isn't the answer that a lot of people want to hear, but some of my friends would tell me, "Oh, you have such a cool job, man. I wish I could do that. You just fly around, talk to people, and sleep late, work late." And they don't realize that this sounds so cliched, but there is that 1% of inspiration and the 99% of perspiration. It's a cliche, but it's 100% true. This is tough stuff. It takes a long, long time to understand. It takes a longer time to get in the community to be able to do this for a living. So the creative process is something that I live with day and night. I don't clock on and clock off. When I'm writing about something, I dream about it. I don't try to dream about it, but I dream about it. I'm thinking about it all day long, every single day. It's in the back of my mind, and I love it.
Mm. So, what sort of sparked you on this journey in the first place of leaving journalism to then going to study this science or all these lost arts in the first place? Like, what sparked you on that journey?
Well, I, worked in a very corporate, stodgy environment where people were literally just waiting to clock off and retire, which is fine. And then, they said, "Oh, that's when I'm going to live." But it just doesn't work out that way. Those best laid plans. I really think now is the time to do whatever you want to do, because who knows what's going to happen. For instance, if you had a bunch of travel plans set up this year, oh, oops, there's a pandemic. Like now you're not going anywhere for 2 years. So another reason why I think that don't wait for something, don't wait for an excuse. I think that if you really find the thing that possesses you, that you respond to, you should go and do it. So there wasn't one thing in particular that pushed me into this direction. I just knew in the back of my mind the whole way through that I wanted to live in a different way, that I wanted to work in a different manner. I never, ever thought that was possible. But I worked at it for a long, long time before I was able to break free and make that happen.
Did you find it hard to break free?
It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I had a mortgage. I had an old house I was fixing up. At the time, I was 35. So this was not early in my career. People are like, what are you doing? Switching your job at 35. You have this good thing going. You're working up in this world. But I imagine myself in 10 years and 10 years after that. And, what do you want on your gravestone kind of stuff. And I really thought that if I was ever going to go for this, I had to do it at that time. I was already running out of time, really. I had to cut the cord and make it happen. And I didn't have work for a long time. I was sucking up all my savings, and it was so precarious. However, I was happier than I ever was at my most successful at my quote unquote real job. Even when I was sending out 20 queries a week, no one was responding. I was doing something that really nourished my soul, for lack of a better term. And I never regretted it.
That was 13 years ago now. And has your new book titled Breath, has that been sort of like this 13-year progression up until this point? Or when was the moment that you discovered breath and that we had a problem with breath or breathing, I should say?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was an accumulation of tons of things that happened over years and years and years. There was never a moment when I picked up a book or watched a movie and thought, "Oh, breathing, that's it. That's the book I'm going to go write." So some of this started when my uncle passed away. He was a Hollywood sort of playboy and had one of those bachelor through and through his whole life, had one of those hip bachelor pads with like a sauna downstairs, and really 1960s in the Hollywood Hills. And he was, in LA in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and really into meditation and breathing. And I remember looking through all of his stuff, trying to clean out his house, and just finding this huge stack of papers on breathing. And he was convinced that you could use breathing to really enter into these deep altered states, like typical hippy dippy stuff. But that did plant a seed. I thought, wonder what the science would say about this. And then over years and years, I kept finding things that fit into that category. I had a file cabinet in my office. I would just throw things in there. And then I guess the real breaking point was seeing freedivers for the first time in my entire life. I was sent on an assignment last minute by Outside Magazine to go to Greece and write about free diving. And I saw what they did. I was just like, oh my God, if we've forgotten something like this, what else have we forgotten? What other abilities does the human body have? Where will our potential bring us? And I think that we've really sold ourselves short over the past few decades, thinking that we're only able to sit in front of a computer and watch Netflix every night. I think that there's a lot of things our ancestors could do that we couldn't. And it's a thrill for me to dig that stuff up.
Do you think that it's because of pollution in our current world that we've sort of gone away from breathing, or is there something more to it than that? Breathing properly.
I think it's a lot of things. I think that pollution, environmental inputs is certainly a part of this. So what happens is if there's allergens, if there's pollution, if you're allergic to dust, whatever, your nose gets clogged, you start breathing through your mouth. And if you breathe through your mouth long enough, your skeleton will actually start changing. Your face will grow longer, which is really, really freaky. That's harder to do when you're an adult, but when you're young, this can absolutely happen. So common that it's called adenoid face. So they actually have a name for it. So that's part of it, but a lot of it has to do with how the human body, specifically the human skull, has changed in the past few 300, 400 years. Our mouths have gotten so small that our teeth no longer fit. They grow in crooked. And if you have a small mouth, you have a smaller airway. That's one of the main reasons why so many of us are suffering from chronic respiratory problems. We can't breathe.
Mm. What did you discover the reason for that? Why is it different in the modern world as opposed to the past, like past generations? Why do you think that is?
This was a question that I had early on in this research, and I got really curious about it. And I looked at the National Institutes of Health, their website here, and said the causes of crooked teeth are hereditary. It's like, that's weird, because about 300, 400 years ago, I had heard that all of our ancestors had straight teeth. So a researcher that I was reading up on her, she said she'd never seen a hunter-gatherer with crooked teeth. Not one of them. She'd seen hundreds and hundreds of skulls. So where this really came to a fore was when I was invited to go out to the University of Pennsylvania to their Archaeology and Anthropology Museum. They have one of the largest collections of ancient skulls in the whole world. And I was sitting, this was pretty early in my research, I was sitting in this lab just surrounded by ancient skulls from Asia, from Africa, from North America, from the South Pacific. I mean, anywhere on the planet, they all had perfect teeth, every single one of them. And I thought, what the hell have we done to ourselves? And what have I done to myself? I had crooked teeth. I had braces. I had headgear. I had extractions. Everyone I knew had the same thing. So common, people just think that this is normal, but it's not normal.
So you're saying, if I'm getting this correct, if we all had straight teeth, we would all be able to breathe properly. It doesn't really have anything to do with the pollution as much as it has something to do with the teeth.
No, I'm absolutely not saying that. I'm saying straight teeth and a prognathic face are more conducive to healthy breathing. They allow for larger airways, more room in your nasal apertures, more of a chance you're going to have an unobstructed nose because your upper palate will drop correctly in development when you're younger. So even someone with a prognathic face, they're becoming very hard to find, people who have this forward growing face. And they're usually models, which is crazy because that's what we respond to that as function, because that's a functional face, right? And I'm the opposite of that. I have the exact opposite growth. So even if you have a model, if they're constantly exposed to environmental pollution, allergens, if they're allergic to stuff, if they live with mold in the house, they can have chronic respiratory problems. So there's multiple reasons why our breathing has gotten so bad. What I focused on was how our faces have shrunk so much. So we're basically screwed right out of the gate.
This might be a silly question, but does the size of your nose really help? Like, because I've got a big nose.
As do I. It depends how those structures are organized inside of that big nose. The reason why humans started, we all look pretty similar for a long time, for hundreds of thousands of years. And then some of us went north to cold climates. Some of us went to hotter climates. Some of us went to drier climates. And a larger nose helps to humidify and heat up air more efficiently in colder climates. So that's why larger noses grew early on, hundreds of thousands of years ago in Northern Europe, And if you look in places that have very moist, very hot air, we tended to grow flatter noses because that was more efficient. Smaller and flatter noses were more efficient, conducive to those environments. So nowadays, everyone has air conditioning, so it doesn't matter, right? How will our ancestors look hundreds of thousands of years from now? I'm afraid to ask that question. If they're going to be going in the same direction that modern humans have for the last 100 years, we are in big trouble.
So I'm curious about the cold climates. Now, I've found it very interesting that I can actually breathe a lot better, and like when I'm running outside in the cold air, I love wintertime. I can go a lot further and have no issues with my breathing. But yeah, when it's summertime, I find that I struggle a lot. Even this morning, I couldn't really run that far. I actually had to walk because the air quality wasn't that great. And I'm curious why that is the case, the difference between cold versus hot, and how does that actually help with breathing in the first place?
Well, everyone's different. So everyone's going to respond differently to different stuff. So our noses are covered with erectile tissue that can be inflamed and gorged with blood that help them close up, right? And sometimes they dilate and they open and they shift. Our nostrils actually shift throughout the day, right nostril to left nostril. So I would imagine in a very warm and humid climate, maybe the nostril tissues are responding to that. Maybe the air is thicker because there's a lot more moisture. Maybe in a drier climate that's cooler, that's more conducive to airflow through your nose. I know that the nose, just like other functions in the human body, very plastic, very malleable. So the more you do something, the easier it's going to get. A lot of people don't realize that the nose is just like working out your arm. So if I'm going to go and lift weights with this arm, it's going to become developed. Well, your nose can develop and become more conducive to breathing as well. There's so many of those structures can really open up. I've seen that in myself, and I've seen it in dozens and dozens of other people.
And how does your breathing affect, sorry, I should rephrase the question, the autoimmune diseases that we sort of have in our world today, how does that really impact the way we breathe?
So autoimmune diseases, there's a lot of reasons why people get autoimmune diseases. Sometimes it's exposure to mold. Oftentimes it's chronic stress, right? And so when we have this chronic low-grade stress, that can either be exacerbated or sometimes caused by poor breathing. So when we're stressed, we breathe like this. And the more we breathe like this, the more inflamed we're going to get, the more we're going to get stressed out, and becomes this vicious cycle, which is why one of the most effective things you can do when you feel yourself becoming stressed is to slow down your breathing. Don't try to breathe more and say, I need more oxygen. I'm having an asthma attack. I need more oxygen. I'm having a panic attack. I need more oxygen. That's the last thing you should be doing. You should become aware of your breath, start controlling it, and breathing slowly. Because by breathing slowly and by breathing less, you actually get more oxygen that way. This is so counterintuitive, but that's how it works out.
I ended up having a panic attack in year 11, and I noticed that I thought I was having an actual heart attack. And the actual ambulance officer said to me, she's like, just breathe. And I'm like, why is she telling me to breathe? Like, give me some drugs, stick a needle in me, help me out. I literally thought I was having a heart attack, but then she's like, you need to just stop, be level-headed, in and out, in and out. And you notice that it actually takes the edge off a lot of the time. You just become even more calm as a result. Why does breathing do that for us? Like, is it a psychological thing that when we breathe in, it calms us, or is there something more to it?
Well, you had a good EMT. A lot of EMTs wouldn't know how to do that, and that's great that she was so clued in. So what you can do, here's a fun little trick that someone taught me, a researcher taught me years ago. You can take your hand and you can put it on your heart. And we're going to breathe into a rate of about 3, and we're going to breathe out to a rate of to a count of about 6 or maybe 8. If that's difficult for you, cut it short. This isn't a test. So by breathing in, now by breathing out, I want you to do that again. So into a count of about 3, 2, 3, and out, just very slowly. You're going to feel your heart rate slowing down when you breathe out. And if you extend that exhaled breath a little more, your heart rate's going to slow down a little more. Because when we breathe out, we're eliciting a parasympathetic or relaxation response in our bodies. So this isn't some placebo, voodoo, new age thing. This is how the body works. So inhalations are associated with more of a stimulating sympathetic response. So whenever you feel the stress mounting up, if you feel panic coming up, start to exhale longer than you're inhaling and start to extend your breaths, both in and out. What you do is you send messages from your body to your brain that you are safe. Because imagine how a dog breathes when it's sleeping, right? Imagine how a kid breathes before it's learned about politics or anything. They breathe in this very fluid, slow way. So if you breathe, because you're relaxed, right? You're sleeping, your whole body's relaxed. If you breathe in this way, 80% of the messages between the brain and body come from the body. So the body can tell the brain what's going on. And by sending these messages, you can overtake so many thoughts of anxiety and panic. I've seen this so many times. I've seen the studies. I've seen people who have been suffering from chronic panic attacks for decades take control of their breathing and no longer suffer from attacks. It's the only thing that's worked. Tranquilizers can work for a little while, but they're not going to the core issue. The core issue is a nervous system dysfunction, and breathing is the quickest way of hacking into that.
Have you discovered that with effective breathing that we can actually cure asthma, allergies, autoimmune diseases, sleep apnea, everything like that?
So the word cure is tricky. I wouldn't use the word cure. I would say significantly blunt the symptoms of these diseases. Absolutely. There are dozens and dozens of studies showing this. I talked to one woman who was 70 when I talked with her. She had asthma her whole life for 60 years. She couldn't go out and play with other kids. She couldn't walk a few blocks. She was told there was nothing to do. This is an incurable condition. She was told this for 60 years. She learned how to breathe. She took control of her breathing. She was off all steroids, all bronchodilators. She's out hiking. She's out traveling. This fundamentally changed her life. Not only with her, there's a New York Times article about someone else who was on 20 puffs of bronchodilator a day and was also on oral steroids. He had been on steroids for so long that he was losing his sight. And that's what happens when you stay on steroids for so long. It's one of many things. You also get osteoporosis and you get autoimmune diseases. He went down to, I think, 2 or 3 puffs of a bronchodilator a day after 2 weeks of breath retraining. So this is not some sort of fringe crazy stuff. This is you taking control of your breathing. By taking control of your breathing, you can take control of your stress. You can take control of your nervous system function, which is also why breathing is so effective for autoimmune problems.
How have you been able to, like, what are some of the things that you do on a daily basis with your breathing? Like, do you meditate at all? What's your process like?
I wish I had time to sit in front of Buddha, for a few hours a day. It would transformed my life. People think that since you write a book about breathing, you're now the best breather in the world. And I'm just walking around in a shawl, barefooted around San Francisco. But no, my job here was to be an objective journalist, was to go into this world, ask a bunch of questions, be super skeptical, and come out with what I thought was the most honest and truthful view of this world. Not everything I write about in the book worked. And I've got a whole office filled with stuff that didn't work, that I didn't think had substantial science behind it. So the stuff that's in the book it obviously works. There's not only science behind it, but you can hook yourself up to, you can even buy the stuff, heart rate variability monitor, pulse oximeter. This stuff's very cheap right now. Blood pressure monitor. You can breathe, and within a couple minutes, you're going to watch this transformation happen in your body. You can even buy EEGs and look at your brain waves when you breathe in different ways. So, that's a long way of saying I picked up a bunch of tricks. I use them as often as I can. I'm not the best breather in the world. I still am on this journey, but this stuff, learning from these researchers and therapists, has absolutely changed my life. And subjective input is I guess, interesting, but what's more interesting to me was when I took a CAT scan a year before and a year after, practicing healthy breathing habits, chewing, doing other stuff, and finding that my airway in some areas grew from 15 to 20%. I'm not young, I'm not developing. Like, youth was a long time ago for me. So it gave me hope for other old people that, like, even when you're in middle age, you can drastically affect how your body is operating. So there's really no excuses.
On your travels and journey of asking a lot of questions, did you end up finding one question that you didn't find an actual answer for?
Oh, I have so many questions coming soon in books, at bookstores all around you, everyone. Some questions regarding breathing. And this is what I thought was so wonderful. For all of the amazing technologies, all the amazing measurements, they still can't figure out how the hell these people are able to do what they do. They know they're doing it. If you're talking about Swami Rama, so here's a guy that had honed his abilities to breathe in certain ways, to focus in certain ways, that he could move the temperature on a hand 11 degrees on the same hand. One side would be gray, the other side would be red and flushed with blood. They then put an EKG on him, and he was able to beat his heart at 300 beats per minute, atrial fibrillation, on his own accord for about a minute. So they recorded him for 30 seconds, but he said he'd been doing it for a minute. All of this stuff is totally impossible, right? Medically, scientifically impossible. And yet a Navy physicist was the one doing these studies at a renowned institution. And it's all there and was reported in the New York Times in 1970. So the fact that people still can't figure out how these people are able to do it doesn't mean it's not possible, doesn't mean we can't do it. It just makes them very frustrated, and they focus on other things they can figure out and publish about. But to me, those are the things I go into. Those cracks in science is where I think the real knowledge, the real potential, and the real learning can take place. Is looking at what happens when these people are able to really focus on their body's abilities and do things that are just absolutely mind-blowing. And I think that some of this is, a lot of people aren't spending 30 years in a cave meditating anymore. I mean, I hope they are, but they're not on Facebook. They're not on podcasts. And so part of the fun part of my job is to go out and try to find these people and get them to trust me enough and take me into their worlds and come back out on the other side and write about them.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, but Wim Hof and the Wim Hof method, do you know much about it? Like, you've done a lot of research. Have you interviewed Wim? Have you studied his breathing practices? Because he did the exact same thing. Like, I believe he injected himself with some like crazy bacteria, deadly disease, and he was able to cure himself from it through breathing. And that's just nuts. Like, I've found that fascinating. Like how?
So Wim's an awesome guy. I speak to him every few weeks. He's done more for breathing awareness than anyone else I'd say in the past 50 years. He's helped people overcome chronic disease states. I mean, he has. They've been measured, their progress. He's helped people overcome anxieties. He's helped people reach that next step up in human potential. He calls it, or actually people call it, the Wim Hof method. He didn't invent any of this stuff, and he's the first to admit that. This stuff's been around for thousands of years, and he kind of cracks up when I ask him about it. He's like, I didn't invent this. Cold exposure, people have been doing that for forever. He was just smart enough to put it in his package, in his own package, and show the world. He's like, first I'm going to break 26 world records, then I'm going to show you how to do this. So I practice that breathing technique. I won't call it Wim Hof method. I won't call it Tumo. It's a ancient breathing technique. A couple times a week. I absolutely love it. I feel huge benefits from it. And the science is very clear on that. The study you're referring to is when they shot him up with E. coli, yes, which is an endotoxin, which can completely destroy you, like shivers, headache, very sick. He went... breathed his Wim Hof breath, suffered no symptoms, and then brought in a group of people against a group of controls that did the exact same thing after 4 days of training. 4 days of training. And the controls all suffered from symptoms. So this stuff was reported in Nature, which is the top scientific journal in the world. So new age placebo stuff does not make it into Nature, people. And yet I still have scientists, still have researchers that say, oh, the alleged effects of Wim Hof. Oh, he allegedly did. It's like, what else do you need to do? There it is on camera. Okay, there's the data. There's the study. So I don't try to entertain that world. If people are curious, they want to have a intelligent conversation, they want to exchange information, I love to talk to anyone, even if they don't agree with what I'm saying at all. If there's a reasoned conversation. But when people carte blanche just throw out real science that has been done at top institutions, where do you start? You know?
What would you say to somebody that actually does disagree with you on this subject?
I say, give me a call. Let's talk. And if you start yelling at me and talking about QAnon, then I'm going to hang up the phone. And a lot of people, I won't say they've disagreed, but they have been unsure about certain aspects of research in this book. Tumo is a great example, right? So here is this, and this is what Wim Hof does. Here's this breathing technique that allows you to heat your body up and sit in the snow for hours at a time and not get frostbite and not get hypothermia, okay? So Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School had heard about this and thought it was complete BS. He went out to Dharamsala, found these guys. You can see the videotape all over YouTube, okay? He put them in a cold room, put a wet sheet over their backs. Within a half an hour, the sheet was completely dry. And this is available and this is a guy at Harvard. So I don't know what else. It becomes less a conversation about science and more conversation about personal politics. And personal politics are great. But if you're looking at science, science is about measuring things and conducting studies. And even if the outcome doesn't fit into your worldview, too bad. Science doesn't care. Okay. And that's the world that I want to stay in. There's so much political BS. There's so much scientism out there. But again, breathing is so easy to measure. This isn't measuring something like the spirit or the soul. Good luck measuring this. This is stuff you can put a few simple sensors on your body and see what happens. And again, for this really weirdo stuff, no one would believe it, which is why these studies were conducted at top institutions by top people and published in top publications. I'm not sure what else you can do beyond that.
I'm curious, having said all that and having all this, I guess, propaganda all out there in the world, the political side of things, you name it, how do we know for a fact, just for an average person, how do we know that this all is truthful? Is it because of the more or less the research behind it, or is it because someone is challenging it to be false in the first place? What?
Mhm. I think both. I think the first thing I would do is suggest people go out and buy one of these. They're about $15. This is a pulse oximeter, and breathe differently and see how your breathing affects your body. Okay. Then check your blood pressure and see how it affects your blood pressure. And then check your heart rate variability. Breathe in a very disjointed way, which is the way most of us breathe throughout the day. And then breathe at a rate of about 6 breaths in, six breaths out. Sorry. And you will see a transformation happening in your body. So I would start with personal experience. Breathe in different ways, see how it works for you. Remain skeptical, and then look at the science. I knew that these claims were outrageous, which is why I had 12 doctors read over this book. My father-in-law is a pulmonologist. My brother-in-law is an ER doctor. I included about 500 scientific references in the back of the book. There's more references for free on my website. I convinced the publisher to have me print up these references. There's videos attached to those references where I could find them. There's data sheets. And so you can start with that, but I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm here to objectively report on this stuff, and you can draw your own conclusions. But some of this reminds me of, and surprisingly, I just want to mention, I was expecting like doctors just to come after me and say, breathing has nothing to do with asthma. Breathing has nothing to do with anxiety. And the exact opposite has happened. And that has been shocking to me because I had always learned these people are really conservative. But I think the pandemic actually helped. I just spoke at Stanford Medical School. I'm speaking at Yale. I'm speaking at Harvard. These are very conservative institutions that wouldn't be entertaining this stuff if the science wasn't firmly supporting it. And so, beyond that, if people still don't, if this is outside their worldview, they don't want to accept it, that's fine. But it reminds me of like climate science. How many more studies do we have to put out to show that there's climate change on the planet, that this is caused by CO2? There's 1,200 studies, and people are like, the science is still very thin. I don't know what to do for you, my friends. And that's where the conversation can start to ebb out.
I think that's where it also becomes very highly political. And
of course it does.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like I said, I don't want to be an evangelist for breathing. I want to be an evangelist for journalism, for science, for research. And nothing in my book is my hypothesis. This is from interviews over years and years with the researchers in the field, and all their names are in there. So you can feel free to look up their studies and talk to them directly. Some of them will engage these conversations.
What do you think the future of breathing as a society, where do you think that is headed?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a hard question. This stuff is easy. It's free. It's available to everyone. So whether or not you use it is up to you. No one can make you use it. I think with increased awareness, something amazing has happened in the past few years is we have these things called podcasts and health podcasts where people are getting so much information that they could not have gotten otherwise. Some of these podcasts are filled with complete BS, but others aren't. Look at who's conducting the podcast, look at who's on, look at the scientific references behind what they're saying. But this is a wonderful way of disseminating information directly to people that we have not had in the past. Mm-hmm. So what I spend so many years doing is digging through these awful medical libraries. I'm in the stacks where no one's been for years and it's dusty, and reading through these papers with these titles that are 30 words long, just awful stuff, and try to translate that stuff into regular English. So, it's there. I think the future of breathing could be bright if we are willing to take it, just like the future of nutrition could be very bright for people. But in our country, you've got 40% of the population obese, like beyond overweight. So it just comes, I think it really comes down to a matter of will. Do you want to improve your health? Do you want to help your body live longer? Do you want to be happier? Do you want to take charge of stuff? Some people absolutely do. Now the resources are there for them. Some people don't, and I'm not sure what to do for them. They got to come around.
You raised a very interesting point there, real quick, about people that are obese. Now, I'm curious, is this kind of information or this kind of technique of breathing, is that all available to people that are obese or just regular, normal sized people like myself? Can it work on both?
Absolutely, everybody. What I focused on in the center of the book, which is really the core of the book, is here is stuff that doesn't matter if you're an asthmatic, it doesn't matter if you have anxiety, it doesn't matter if you're an ultra marathoner, it doesn't matter if you're just a dude who sits behind a desk all day. Here's stuff that everyone needs to do in order to celebrate in better health. This is the foundation of breathing, which is the foundation of health. And that's to breathe through your nose as often as you can, especially at night, all the time. Okay. Nasal breathing. Breathe slowly, breathe lightly, and breathe a little deeper. Breathe less. Okay. And exhale fully. And this is something that will benefit everybody. Then, if you've mastered that, you can get into the weirdo crap, the Wim Hof stuff, holotropic breath work, Sudarshan Kriya. Sometimes people who have very severe problems where these lighter methods just don't seem to give them that push, they can go directly into these harder methods, but it's going to take a lot more time and effort. Wim Hof is not easy. Like sitting in an ice bath for 5 minutes, it ain't easy. I suggest people go slow, but if people really want that baptism by fire, you can fast forward. So, especially people with obesity, and this is what's so sad and cruel is they have limited lung capacity because so much is pushing against their lungs. So without being able to breathe these full and enriching breaths, it's actually harder to burn fat. So they tend to burn anaerobically instead of aerobically. You need to burn fat aerobically, not anaerobically. So there's, you can lose weight, that can help, but you can also learn these breathing techniques, which I firmly believe can help you lose weight more efficiently. And so I would really start, as I mentioned in the book, you can eat the right foods, you can exercise. If you're not breathing correctly, you're never, ever really going to be healthy. And I really believe that's true.
Wow. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. So fascinating diving into all this. Couple more final questions because I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
What has been the worst piece of advice you have ever received in your life, and did you take it on board?
Yeah, I mean, I heard from teachers, I was quite a little ass growing up, a real smart ass in class. But where I grew up, which was a very conservative, people think California is all just like good vibes and, it was bell bottoms and VW bugs and surfing. And surfing was a part of the picture. But Southern California is an extremely conservative, very conservative place. So when I was growing up, the whole name of the game was just quietly do your job. Life is a pain in the ass. You have to keep your head down. You have to keep going forward. It'll be over soon enough. You'll die and you'll be okay. And this was basically instilled in everyone in various ways of like, don't like your job? Too bad. We all got to work. Don't like your life? Too bad. Life sucks. And, at a young age, I moved up to Northern California, which has a different view of life and the potential of life. And it was a really smart thing, much more open-minded people. So don't take that advice. You really need to follow your heart. I mean, that's what living's for. It's not just about squeaking by. It's about actually contributing to life on this planet, at least in my view, and helping other people out and having a good time doing it. I mean, that's really the secret sauce.
Do you have any regrets at all?
I have regrets all the time, man, constant regrets. But I find by learning from those regrets to make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes is a valuable lesson to say that I've never had any regrets. It's all been smooth sailing, every decision. I make terrible decisions all day, every day, but hopefully I will make fewer of those decisions later on in life because you learn and you're able to be flexible.
What is currently a big fear that is plaguing your mind right now?
Well, this sounds real cliche, but that this freaking pandemic is just going to keep going. I built my life around being able to travel, to experience different things. I mean, that's what journalists do, right? I'm really excited to dip into a new book, to start some other projects, but that requires me to travel. And I know that there's people that are so much more worse off, all the healthcare workers, healthcare workers in my family, and all of this sounds so trite. I understand that, but from a personal perspective, I really miss that connection with other people and that experience and getting out into the world.
Well, I hope it all ends very, very soon, to be honest with you, because I'm sick of it.
Well, you, me, and 7 billion other people are probably pretty sick of it at this time.
James, my final question for you. This is my all-time favorite question. It's a hypothetical one, so you're going to have to imagine with me. So just picture for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100 and your friends have decided to put together a film for you, the James Nestor film. We can't title it Breath, but we'll title it just James Nestor. And they've been able to get everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how they got it all. We'll call it magic. But they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday in the form of a film. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
I want that film to say one thing, that ambition is the last refuge of failure. And I want that film to look like the first half of the film, Altered States, because that first half of that film is the most beautiful thing in the world. I don't think you need any clips of me doing anything. I've got those in my brain. I've got my friends have those in their brains. We don't need any of that. I think just those words right there about ambition. Life is not about having ambition. It's about doing stuff. So you can be ambitious about everything in the world, but that doesn't move the needle forward. I think it's about going out and working and making stuff happen.
I love that. And where can people find you, learn more about you, buy a book, and connect with you?
My website is a place to start, Mr. James Nestor. That's mrjamesnestor.com. You can put a /breath there. There are free breathing exercises. I do interviews. I've got so many questions, hundreds of questions from people that I didn't feel qualified to answer. So I was able to con a bunch of experts in the field from Harvard and all else to come on and answer these questions, which has just been a wonderful resource. Everything's free for everyone. If you want to buy the book, it's available pretty much wherever books are sold, which I guess is online nowadays, but support your indie bookshop if you can. Those guys are still hanging in there, so support them. I'm trying to get better at this thing called social media, which is very new to me. I'm old and I hate this kind of stuff, but I was convinced by various people that you could use it for the greater good. So my account on Instagram is the most active. It's Mr. James Nestor, and I'm only posting things related to this research, to breathing, and the other science-related projects I'm working on.
Well, I'll make sure that's all in the links below when this episode goes live. James Nestor, thank you so much for your time, for everything that you're putting out there into the world. I've found this incredibly fascinating and very rewarding as well. So I'm going to go and try and practice as much breathing as possible. So everyone, remember to breathe. And thank you, James Nestor, for coming on the Storybox podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me.